The smell of burned paper still makes me sick. Because when I was 17, I stood in my backyard watching my father toss my future into a metal barrel like garbage. One by one, my college acceptance letters curled into black ash while he stared at me and said, "You were never leaving this family." But 3 years later, a U.S. Army colonel knocked on his front door carrying a folder that changed everything. My name is Emma Grayson. I grew up in a tiny rural town in Tennessee where people believed daughters should stay close, marry early, and never dream too loudly. Especially my father. My dad, Richard Grayson, believed education made women disrespectful. That was his favorite word. Disrespectful. If my mother voiced an opinion? Disrespectful. If I questioned him? Disrespectful. If I wanted a future beyond our town? Apparently that was betrayal. My older brother Caleb escaped first. He joined the army at 19 after years of fighting with Dad constantly. The night he left, my father called him weak. My brother looked him dead in the eyes and said, "No. I'm just tired of being trapped here." Dad didn't speak to him properly again for years. After Caleb left, all my father's control focused entirely on me. He monitored where I went, checked my phone, mocked my grades. And the cruelest part? I was actually brilliant in school. Not saying that arrogantly. It's just true. I loved learning. Physics, literature, engineering. Anything complicated fascinated me. Teachers pushed me toward scholarships constantly. But every achievement at home became an argument. Why do you need college? You think you're better than us? No man wants an educated wife correcting him. That last sentence came directly from my father. Repeatedly. My mother rarely defended me. Not because she agreed. Because she was exhausted. Years of emotional survival had turned her quiet. Then during senior year, everything changed. I secretly applied to 12 universities with help from my guidance counselor. I didn't even let myself hope too much. But then the acceptance emails started arriving. University after university. Scholarships. Offers. Possibilities. I remember crying alone in the school bathroom after receiving the letter from Carnegie Mellon. Not because of prestige. Because for the first time in my life, I saw a doorway out. A real one. My guidance counselor, Mrs. Alvarez, hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. "You're going to leave this town," she whispered proudly. I wanted to believe her. But I made one mistake. I brought the physical letters home. At first, I hid them carefully under my mattress. But fathers like mine notice happiness quickly. Especially when they didn't cause it. One evening during dinner, Dad stared at me suspiciously. "You've been smiling too much lately." I froze. Mom lowered her eyes instantly. Then Dad stood up abruptly and walked toward my room. My stomach dropped so fast I thought I might faint. Dad. But he already found them. The folder. The letters. The scholarships. My entire future sitting in his hands. I still remember the silence while he flipped through them. Then came the laugh. Not proud. Mocking. "MIT," he scoffed. "You actually thought you were leaving?" I tried grabbing the folder back. He shoved me so hard I hit the hallway wall. Mom gasped quietly. Then Dad marched outside. I followed barefoot crying and screaming. "What are you doing?" But he ignored me. He walked straight to the old metal burn barrel behind our shed. And one by one, he threw my acceptance letters into the fire. Stanford. Michigan. Georgia Tech. Cornell. Burning. Melting. Gone. I can still hear the crackling sound. I begged him to stop. Actually begged. That humiliation still hurts. And then he said the sentence that haunted me for years. You belong here. Not with us. Here. Like I was property attached to land. Then came twist number 1. The next morning at school, I discovered something horrifying. Someone had withdrawn my college enrollment confirmations online overnight. Applications cancelled. Scholarship responses declined. My father had used information from the letters to sabotage everything electronically too. I completely broke down in the counselor's office. Mrs. Alvarez looked furious in a way I'd never seen before. "Emma," she said carefully, "did you authorize any of this?" "No." Her jaw tightened instantly. That afternoon she contacted multiple admissions offices personally. And that's when we learned something important. Several universities suspected coercion immediately because the withdrawals sounded abnormal. Especially after one admissions officer heard me crying during verification. But the deadlines were passing quickly. Housing slots disappearing. Scholarships expiring. And without my father's tax documents finalized, financial aid complications exploded everywhere. For the first time in my life, I truly believed he'd won. Then came twist number 2. 2 weeks later, Caleb came home unexpectedly. I hadn't seen him in nearly a year. He walked through the front door in uniform carrying a duffel bag and immediately sensed tension. What happened? Nobody answered. Dad stayed silent in his recliner watching TV. Mom started crying instantly. And eventually I told him everything. Every burned letter. Every cancelled application. Every insult. I'll never forget the expression on Caleb's face. Not rage. Disappointment. Like part of him always hoped our father wasn't as bad as he remembered. Then Caleb quietly asked Dad one question. "Did you really destroy her future because you couldn't control it?" Dad didn't even look away from the television. "She's a child." "No," Caleb replied coldly. "She's smarter than everyone in this house combined." That fight became explosive. Screaming. Threats. Furniture knocked over. And finally Dad yelled. "If she leaves, she never comes back." Silence. Heavy silence. Then Caleb looked at me and said, "Pack a bag." My father stood instantly. "She's not going anywhere." But Caleb stepped between us. And for the first time in my life, my father backed up. Just slightly. Enough for me to notice. I left that night. Not for college. Not yet. I slept on Caleb's tiny apartment couch near his military base while we tried rebuilding the destroyed applications. Some schools rejected reinstatement immediately. Others had passed deadlines. But a few listened. And one changed my life. Purdue University reopened my file after hearing the circumstances. Not out of pity. Because Mrs. Alvarez had secretly preserved copies of everything. Recommendation letters. Transcripts. Scholarship records. She anticipated something might happen. To this day, that woman remains one of the greatest humans I've ever known. I got accepted again. Partial scholarship. Engineering program. I cried so hard Caleb thought something terrible happened. But the damage from my father didn't disappear magically. I arrived at college traumatized. Every success felt temporary. Every mistake felt catastrophic. I worked 3 jobs. Rarely slept. And constantly feared everything could vanish overnight. Meanwhile, Dad told relatives I ran away with liberal strangers. Apparently education was now a cult. Years passed. I graduated top of my class. Then landed work designing structural systems for military infrastructure projects. The irony wasn't lost on me. The daughter my father said was too emotional for engineering. Ended up helping build facilities stronger than anything he ever touched. I barely spoke to my parents during those years. Mom occasionally called secretly. Dad never did. Then came the knock. The knock that changed everything. I was 24 when Caleb called me, suddenly laughing in disbelief. "You're never going to believe this." Apparently our father's construction company had been bidding on a major military subcontract. A huge opportunity for his struggling business. And that morning, a colonel personally visited his office for final evaluation paperwork. Not random. Specific. Because the project involved infrastructure systems. Systems partially designed by my team. And when the colonel noticed the last name Grayson during discussion, he asked casually, "Any relation to Emma Grayson?" Dad proudly answered, "My daughter." The colonel froze. Then asked another question. "Your daughter is the engineer who redesigned Fort Mercer's reinforcement systems?" Dad apparently smiled immediately. "Oh yeah, she got lucky with all that school stuff." Lucky. Then the colonel asked one final question. "Interesting. Because Major Caleb Grayson once told me her father burned her college acceptance letters." Silence. Absolute silence. My father reportedly went pale instantly. But the colonel wasn't finished. He opened a project folder slowly and said, "Funny thing about talented people, Mr. Grayson. Sometimes the world notices them even when their own families don't." That line spread through town within days. Small towns survive on gossip like oxygen. Suddenly everybody knew. Not the sanitized version. The real one. The burned letters. The sabotage. Everything. Then came the climax. A week later, my father showed up unannounced outside my office building. Older. Smaller somehow. Holding a worn envelope. Inside were ashes. Literal ashes. He'd apparently kept some from the burn barrel all these years. "I shouldn't have done it," he admitted quietly. No dramatic tears. No cinematic apology. Just exhaustion. And honestly, that almost hurt more. Because after years of cruelty, the great explanation was simply fear. Fear I'd outgrow him. Fear he'd lose control. Fear the world would show me I deserved better. I looked at the ashes for a long moment. Then asked him something I'd carried for years. "Did you ever love me more than you feared losing power over me?" He couldn't answer. Not really. And that silence told me everything. We stood there for another minute before he quietly said, "The colonel refused the contract." I nodded slowly. Not surprised. Then he whispered, "I think I ruined this family." And maybe that was the first truly honest thing he ever said. Today, I still keep one partially burned acceptance letter in a frame. Mrs. Alvarez recovered it from the barrel after I left. The edges are blackened. Half the words destroyed. But one sentence survived perfectly. "We are pleased to offer you admission." Sometimes I stare at it and think about how close I came to losing everything because one man couldn't stand the idea of his daughter becoming more than he understood. And the strangest part? The real revenge wasn't the colonel. Or the failed contract. It was this. My father spent his whole life trying to convince me I was too small for the world. Then the world proved him wrong in front of everyone.